Thank you for joining us for the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association virtual conference presentations.
Welcome to the Romance Writer's Guide. Tips and resources to help you capture your readers' hearts. Next slide. So a little about myself. I've been a published author since 1985. I have 20 historical and contemporary romances in print. Those have been published by Thomas Nelson, Zondervan, Guideposts, Bigwater Publishing LLC, which is my own publishing house, and I've been publishing since 1989. Next slide. So here's what I'm going to talk about today. Age groups, subgenres, plotting your romance, historical romances, what's popular and what's not, sweet to sexy and everything in between. Next slide. And here's what I will not be discussing. I will not talk about how to research historical romance because you need to join Tyler Tischler on September 24th. I won't be talking about character development because you need to join Naomi Rawlings on October 8th. And I won't be doing any talking about marketing and promotion because you can join Smith Publicity's presentation on October 15th. Next slide. Okay, the age groups for the romance genre break down somewhat like this. First, we have young adults, which is ages 12 to 18 years old, and then new adult, which is ages 18 to 25 years old, and the adult readers who are over 25. The Romance Writers of America does not define the new adult category, but mentions young adult romance as a subgenre. And Amazon includes new adult and college in its subgenre list. Next slide. The subgenres are pretty extensive in the romance world. In RWA, Romance Writers of America, we have contemporary romance, which is 1950 to the present. We have erotic romance, which is explicit sex in any era. We have historical romance, which is any time prior to 1950. And we have romance with spiritual elements of any belief system. And we have romantic suspense, which is a story that includes suspense, mystery, and thriller. And young adult romance, which makes the young adult life central to the plot. Next slide. At Amazon, they have quite an extensive list of subgenres. Action and adventure, African American, anthologies, clean and wholesome, collections and anthologies, contemporary, fantasy, gothic, next slide, there's even more, historical romance, holidays, inspirational, LGBT, medical, military, multicultural and interracial, mystery and suspense, and next slide. Even more at Amazon, they have new adult and college, paranormal, romantic comedy, science fiction, sports, time travel, and westerns. Okay, next slide. So what is missing from the subgenre lists? Amish romances. It's a subgenre that originated in 1997 with a book by Beverly Lewis called The Shunning, and that became a movie in 2011. And the Amish romance subgenre has its own subgenres. Mysteries, young adult, second chance at love, and Amish vampires, which are not from the inspirational viewpoint. What I want to say about these Amish romances is, first of all, be aware that these are not written for the Amish to read. In fact, the Amish rules generally forbid the reading of fiction, although some Amish women admit to reading them in secret. The readers of these stories are evangelical women over the age of 40. Next slide. Plotting your romance. Before I get into these bullet points, I want to make a note here. You need to think about the length of your story. Harlequin publishes 15 romance lines with varying word lengths from 50,000 to 75,000 words. However, the word count for a romance can be as short as a novella of 25,000 words or as long as a full-length novel if it's 110,000 words. Popular in recent years is the romance novella that runs between 25,000 and 35,000 words. At least 2 highly reputable publishers are releasing romances of this length in collections. Barber Books, which is an imprint of Barber Publishing Incorporated, and Bethany House, a division of Baker Publishing Group. In addition, many independently published authors have gained traction with the romance novella collections. So in plotting your romance, there are many dozens of plot devices that have been used, and many of them work both for the contemporary and the historical settings. And we're going to go through a list of tropes, but beyond the list that we're going to go through, even more of them can be found by consulting Victorine Leski's How to Write a Swoon-Worthy, Sweet Romance Novel. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the tropes. Next slide. First one, close to my own heart, dog lovers. You can have the dogs loving each other and their people don't get along. A dog lover meets a cat lover and the fur flies. A dog lover story combined with Christmas. And a particularly good example of dog lover plus Christmas is a title called The Dogs of Christmas by W. Bruce Cameron, who you might have recognized him as he is the author of A Dog's Purpose. That was even made into a movie. But in his story, The Dogs of Christmas, a dog caregiver novice, a hero, he becomes involved with a heroine who is a dog expert at a shelter. And this Christmas story has an O. Henry twist, which is very inventive. And since readers love Christmas romances, it's a good combination for anyone to try. Next slide. Enemies to lovers, okay? The main characters form an instant dislike at first meeting. And then you can amplify that tension if you combine it with a trapped device. I used the instant dislike part of this idea in a novel I wrote long ago. It's a contemporary romance called For the Love of Roses. And by the way, that is available for free today on Kindle in case you want to check it out. Another example where I used an instant dislike is in the book I wrote called Mackinac, which is the first book in my Great Lakes Romances series. Next slide. A fake relationship is another trope that is sometimes extremely effective with a romance story. So how does that work? Well, for some reason, maybe it's a lie told to a relative or boss that the hero or heroine really does have a serious romantic commitment. So that the couple must pretend to be in love. Next slide. So how can we make that work? It could be a fake boyfriend or girlfriend, a fake engaged couple, or even a fake marriage. But whatever path you choose, you have to create some compelling reasons why the couple can't fall in love. Next slide. Friends to lovers. The hero and heroine have been longtime friends and resist becoming romantically involved. Why? Maybe they have a desire not to ruin their friendship, or maybe they have quite a difference in their ages. I used that in a story I wrote called Charlotte of South Manitou Island, where there was an age difference and there was a friendship between the two main characters to begin with. Okay, next slide. Love almost lost. In that kind of trope, you have the hero or heroine who only recognizes their love for the other after the couple parts. And after that aha moment, They must go after their beloved on a mad dash to revive the relationship. A really good example of this is the Christmas romantic comedy movie starring Henry Winkler as the uncle of the heroine in The Most Wonderful Time of Year. In that story, which is one of my favorite Christmas movies ever, Jennifer is a single mom. She has a 6-year-old son, and she is approaching Christmas somewhat like Scrooge. And then Uncle Ralph visits and brings with him a fellow passenger from his flight. His name is Morgan. And Morgan and Jennifer, of course, they seem completely incompatible, since Morgan is a carefree chef with no life plan, and Jennifer has a plan to marry a wealthy businessman. And as the plot unfolds, Jennifer and Morgan clash again and again. But on Christmas Day, when Jennifer's engagement to Mr. Perfect falls apart, she realizes with Uncle Ralph's help that Morgan is the right match for her, and she must stop him from boarding a plane and flying out of her life forever. And here's what I want you to think about. The scene at the airport in this movie is priceless. Watch it if you can, it's really great. Okay, next slide. May, December. Okay, the couple can't fall in love because one is much older than the other. I combined this concept with Friends to Lovers, as I mentioned, in Charlotte, the South Manitou Island. And a real life example of this is Celine Dion and her manager husband, Rene. He became her manager when she was 12 years old, but the couple was not married until she was 25. And he was 26 years older than Celine. Okay, next slide. Romantic comedy. This is a subgenre that's had renewed interest of late. It can be sweet or sexy, and it can either be contemporary or historical. And if you want to learn more about how to do romantic comedy, you can consult Billy Murnett's book, Writing the Romantic Comedy, 20th Anniversary Expanded and Updated Edition, The Art of Crafting Funny Love Stories for the Screen. And it, you know, as we know as writers, if we're writing fiction, we want our books to, fiction books to be compiled by a series of scenes, so it should be helpful. Excuse me, next slide. Romantic suspense. Romantic suspense includes danger, a mystery, and a villain. It's a romance story that is equally parts of romance and suspense, and it's probably the most challenging subgenre to write. The people who really know how to do this well are Faye Lamb, Patience Bloom, and Susan Sleeman. And if you do a Google search on each of these ladies' names, you will find articles about writing romantic suspense that are very informative. Next slide. Second chance at love. The hero and heroine were either romantically involved or married, and then they broke up. They meet again and find a second chance at love. This works well when it's paired with other tropes, such as fake relationship. This is a really popular trope in the romance genre. So if you want to dive deeper into this trope, look up the book, How to Write a Swoon-Worthy Second Chance Romance Novel, which was released in November 2019 by Victorine E. Lesky. Next slide. Too many heroes. Well, two or more men fall for the same heroine. And an example of that, I used it in my historical romance, Bridget of Cat's Head Point. Next slide. Trapped. Okay, so the couple is forced together, and you can do that in a number of different ways, either in an elevator, in a cabin, in a car stuck in a snowstorm, in an overnight office overnight, or in a hotel room during a disaster. Now, an example of the trapped plot is the movie It Happened One Night, a 1934 romantic comedy film with Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert. Next slide. So now we're going to take a look at historical romances. Some eras are popular and some have never caught on. So let's take a look and go to the next slide. Revolutionary War romances. They have really not been very popular, so that market might be quite limited. But if your heart is in that era and you do want to write about it, check out The Lace Maker by Laura Franz. I have read her work and she is really, truly a gifted writer. She's a Christie Award winner of 2018 and an Evangelical Christian Publishers Association bestseller. And I am pretty sure that you'll learn a lot if you decide to investigate her work and what you might do in the Revolutionary War era. Okay, next slide. Regency romances. The British Regency era was from 1811 to 1820 and was popularized by Jane Austen. And then in the 1900s, Georgette Heyer, an American writer, popularized the genre. And let's go on to the next slide. It's very, very important to be accurate with Regency because so many people are into it nowadays. So you have to be very accurate with the social customs, the settings, the costumes, and the vocabulary. And originally, all of these Regency romances were sweet romances. But, you know, that's the old days. Now we're into the new days and the new writers, and many of them are now steamy. Now, I have a favorite Regency author who does both sweet and sexy. Her name is Erica Ridley. She's a really top-notch Regency writer. And the best example of her work that I've read is The Viscount's Tempting Minx, which is the Dukes of War Book 1. And the dialogue in it is quick, funny, and completely unpredictable. Now, if you want to find another way to grasp the Regency vocabulary, settings, customs, and costumes, you can watch the Masterpiece series and movies that are set in that era. And those would be Sanditon, Emma, Sense and Sensibility, Northanger Abbey, Persuasion, Mansfield Park, and Pride and Prejudice, which were all adapted from Jane Austen novels. But if you'd rather read her novels, you can do that online for free at www.janeausten.org. Okay, next slide. Civil War romances. Well, ever since Gone with the Wind, Civil War fiction has become intriguing costume drama. And the plot possibilities include, but aren't limited to, Underground Railroad workers, spies, women disguised as men. But be careful because you need to do accurate research on the costumes and don't rely on movies or television to dress your characters, because with the popularity of Civil War reenacting, readers of this era will know whether you're accurate with your historical details. Okay, next slide. Western romances. These are popular both in contemporary and historical eras. Some of the choices of doing those stories would include pioneering stories, mail order bride stories, or women going west to escape the shame of indiscretions. These stories are just as varied as the historical backdrops against which they're set. But I have noticed the mail order bride theme seems to be predominating right now. But if you want some good story fodder, go and take a look at the letters and diaries of the pioneer and homesteading women. One example is Letters of a Woman Homesteader by Eleanor Pruitt Stewart, which I got a short while back for like 99 cents at Amazon. So if you want a Kindle for 99 cents on that era, you can do that. Let's go to the next slide. The Victorian and Edwardian era romances. Victorian era is 1827 to 1901, and the Edwardian follows that from 1901 to 1910, or I have seen some people include up to 1914, the opening of World War I. Both of these eras are very popular, and you can find really good examples of those romances. My favorite author of those is Amanda Barrett. She's very, very good. She's written many novellas and one full-length romance novel, all of which are available to Amazon if you look her up. And let's go to the next slide. World War I. I'm sorry, but this era hasn't gained much traction. It's very difficult to find stories about World War I that are predominantly of the romance genre. But if it's your passion and you want to write about it, go right ahead, knowing that your market is going to be small. So if you're concerned more about market and less about this era, I'd say try a different era. Okay, next slide. You're going to World War II. This is newly popular in romances. Let me put it this way. Some years ago, World War II wasn't even considered an acceptable era for a romance. They said it wasn't historical. So it wasn't acceptable as an historical era. But nowadays it is, and there have been some very excellent ones written, and you can use the idea of spies or resistance, or you could use a parallel retrospective on true history. And let me say, one of the best romances that I've read that was set during World War II is, again, my friend Amanda Barrett has written one in this era called My Dearest Dietrich. This is the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a famous German theologian, and she tells the story from the viewpoint of the woman he loved, Maria von Wedemeyer. Now, the big exception to this story is that it does not have the hallmark happily ever after ending that is essential for a romance genre novel. But you could take the idea of this World War II story and you could give it a twist so that at the end it comes out well. Okay, and let's go to the next slide. We're going to talk about sweet to sexy and everything in between. Okay, next slide. One publisher does them all, Harlequin. So if you self-publish, your first title will signal the level of sexiness readers can expect from you. And you'll want to stick with that level in your subsequent releases so as not to disappoint them. So if you do decide to write a different kind of romance, either a lot sweeter or a lot sexier than your early releases, you will want to clearly signal that to your readers. One way to accomplish the switch is to adopt a pen name, but another possibility is simply to assign a series name that will define the difference. Let's go to the next slide. So let's take a close look at sweet romances, okay? All right, now the first kiss. If you're doing a sweet historical romance, that first kiss can't be before the engagement, or you're going to risk putting your heroine's reputation on the line. In historical eras, going back into the very, very early 1900s and into the Victorian era, kissing was simply not done unless you were engaged to the person. So you have to be aware of that if you're going to move into those historical eras. But in contemporary stories, of course, we don't have any such restriction. However, if you're doing contemporary, of course, the kiss can happen whenever your heroine is willing for it to happen, but it would be really wise to delay that first kiss until there's some kind of a commitment to the relationship. Next slide. In a romance, of course, the story focus is always the emotions. You've got the push-pull of the romantic couple. You have each one of them want to engage romantically, but each one has reasons why they can't. And for this reason, even as little as a the hero's hand brushing against the heroine's hand. That can call for both the physical and the emotional reaction of the heroine included in the story. So it's very important to keep that focus on the emotions and on the feelings. Now, if you want to, you can find a progression of touch scale in Victorine Leski's How to Write a Swoon-Worthy Second Chance Romance Novel. She's quite good at laying out this whole progression that happens in a romance. And let's go to the next slide. Okay, so beyond the sweet romances, there's no one formula for essential content. Harlequin has guidelines for all of their different series, and you need, as a writer, if you're planning to write for one of their lines, you need to read a lot of the titles in whatever line you wish to write for, so you can really understand what the editors are looking for. But what you can also do is you can go to harlequin.submittable.com/submit, where Harlequin includes all of the guidelines for all of their different romance imprints. Each imprint there has a drop-down arrow, and you can click on it to read the guidelines. Okay, next slide. Okay, so how about some romance writing tips? And here's what I'm going to say. On this particular bullet point list, these are the cliches that you need to avoid at all costs. Do not have your heroine drop something and the hero pick it up for her. Do not have the hero and heroine accidentally bump into each other on a busy sidewalk or going in or out of a door. Do not have your hero or heroine spill coffee or some other liquid or food on the other. Why? The reason is they have become so, all of these particular openings to the hero and heroine meeting, they have all become so cliched that if you're going to do something that's on this list, you really need to make it creative and different. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So here's some final tips. Follow your passion and the money will come. Well, that saying is probably as fictional as the romance you're going to write. I'm sorry to say, you know, but, and here's why. Because probably fewer than 1,000 fiction writers in North America can make a living from their writing. By that, what I mean is that the income is coming solely from the writing, not from speaking engagements, teaching, or some other related activity. Okay, having said all that, nevertheless, follow your heart. Next slide. So I want to thank you for viewing the Romance Writer's Guide. The paperback and the Kindle on this topic are available on Amazon. And right now, today, the Romance Writer's Guide, Tips and Resources to Help You Capture Readers' Hearts. Today, and I think tomorrow too, it's free on Amazon for the Kindle. You can find that and all the other books that I've done are at amazon.com/author/Donna Winters. Next slide. And best wishes with your writing. And thank you very much for being a part of this presentation.
Great. Let's throw it open to any questions anybody might have on the subject of romance writing. A few of you are still muted.
I got a question for you, Donna.
Yeah.
I read one of your books and I enjoyed it. But the reason I read it is because I knew who you are and want to know what you write. My question is, do many men read romance novels?
And the answer to that is more than you think, because men tend to be closet romance readers. I mean, they're not right out there, you know. But truthfully, honestly, way back in the old days when I first started doing my Great Lakes Romances line of books, and I put in the back of those, this is pre-internet days. So I would put in the back of the book a reader survey, hoping that some people would send it in and I could have a name and address that I could send notice to for the next book I wrote. Now, what I want to say is I received feedback from male readers more often than I expected. Now, I can't put a percentage on it because it's a very small percentage, but it surprises me even now how men do read them. And, you know, there's just a certain number of men who enjoy the stories. With mine, because I did Great Lakes romances, okay, and I was really focusing on the historical part of, I'm much more of a historical fiction writer than I am a historical romance writer. I'll just say that right out there, it's the truth. But men were reading mine because they were interested in Great Lakes history and they knew they were going to get some real history in the stories that I wrote. And then I guess they also liked having a non-offensive, lovely story. So yeah, men do read them.
Thanks for that, Donna. Before I forget, can you email me a list of all the book titles you mentioned? Some of them weren't in the slide, and I like to put links on them in your Amazon and in the UPPAA page so that someone's watching the presentation later, they can just click right into them.
Sure, I can send you the Amazon link for each of the ones if you would like.
Even better, save me some time.
Yeah, I will, because I'll just go into my KDP bookshelf and find
All right.
It's how I find them.
So you mentioned a number of different tropes, and I think you actually described a couple of different combinations, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure that, you know, the couple's not getting along and then they're trapped. Are there other combinations that are very popular?
You know what? There are. And off the top of my head, I'm probably not going to name any correctly, but I will tell you this. When I got Victorine Lesky's books, and she has two books out, and one is How to Write a Swoon-Worthy Sweet Romance Novel, I think. The other one is How to Write a Swoon-Worthy Sweet Second Chance Romance Novel, but she's got two of them out there. She can really guide you because she has done a lot of those different combinations. So, you know, I say, look at her because she is very successful and has done a lot of them. Off the top of my head, and this is one I mentioned as I was going through the slides, is readers love Christmas. They just love it. So if you feel so inclined, you know, to write something about Christmas, number one, you have a really good market. You will instantly have a good market for Christmas story. And then combine that with, you know, whatever other trope is, you know, Second Chance at Love, or combine it with trapped, like like they got trapped in bad weather on Christmas Day and they can't go back to their own families or whatever. You know, just there's all kinds of good ways you could put two of those combinations in a story and have it make, you know, the more you can do, the better. I mean, it just makes it much less likely that the reader's going to anticipate the next move your characters are going to make.
Donna, you talked about, you know, classically bad ways for the two protagonists to meet. What are some good ways that strike you from books you've read and so on?
Whoa, good ways. Whoa. Let me think. Oh, of course, you know, one way that they can meet, your character can always be traveling, you know.
Oh.
You don't, then they may not be looking for love, you know, but they end up meeting somebody and it could take off from there. Now, I can give you a way to meet that is very personal to me. This is how I met my husband. Is back when he's a couple of years older than I am. We were both in college, and this is after my freshman year of college. I got a summer job working at Interlaken. And his summer job, and this goes back a number of decades, you know, because we've been married almost 50 years. So this goes back when the dune buggies were being driven over the sand dunes at what is now the, you know, Lakeshore National Park. So he was driving the dune buggies. I was at Interlochen on the food service staff. We at the Interlochen food service staff went over to take a dune buggy ride one evening. He was driving the truck that I got on. That is how we met. It was a summer romance. I went back at the end of the summer to my college and he went back to his. But 3 years later, we kind of reignited our friendship, our romance, and it eventually turned into a marriage. So, and it's been a good marriage. So, you know, there are so many different ways. And look at, well, all right, another family story. I'll tell you how my parents met. But of course, they got married. Yeah, when they met, they were young, very young, but they were in high school. And my mother's her last name was Pat. My father's surname was Rogers. He was alphabetically placed behind her as the seats are lined up row by row, you know, in the classroom. So he was sitting behind her. That's how they met. And then they didn't get married right out of high school or anything, but my mom went on to normal school to learn how to be a teacher. And she went there for 3 years, and then she became a teacher. And they got married after that. So see, there's different ways. Look at real life and see what do you think is a good way to meet? What is a real life way to meet? And then give it a twist, you know?
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
But Donna, yours was a second chance. Would yours be classified? Would your meeting of your husband and getting together be classified as a second chance?
You know, maybe technically it was. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I guess so, because we did go together for that summer. Mm-hmm. We communicated via letters while we were in college. And then that kind of dropped off because we, you know, 3 years is a long time when you're college age. But toward the end of all that, we recommunicated again, writing letters again. And, you know, I was the one, I went from my home was in New York State. So to go to Michigan where his home was, you know, I had to do some traveling. I took a pretty long car trip to get out there to see him. So it did reignite. And I would have to say, technically, yeah. And you know, here's another thing about these second chance ideas is, and it amazes me, because to me, these are not, the way some people are writing them, to me, doesn't seem realistic. But that's because, it's because the era that I grew up in was you went to college, you got your college degree, and then you got married if you were a female. And if you didn't do that, something was wrong with you, okay? That is not how people are looking at it nowadays, and hasn't been how they've been looking at it for a number of decades. So when I pick up a book that's second chance and they meet each other for the second time, and then it starts to tell you the backstory of, oh yeah, well, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I'm going like, really? 5 or 10 years ago? You know, seems like a long stretch for neither of them to have committed to anything else in between, but they're doing it. And some of those stories probably, there are probably some true stories. Yeah. So I guess, you know, if I were going to do a second chance nowadays, especially from the era I came out of, I'd really have to take a look at what people are writing and are successful at marketing. I mean, go to the bestseller list, you know, who's selling the most this week, and find one there and see what their readers like. That's the way I'd do it.
I have something on the
Donna,
tropes too. It's kind of interesting that you're talking about Victorine, because I'm kind of studying with Victorine and her 3 partners, the writing gals.
Yes.
And Victorine, actually one of her partners, Amy, did my covers for my new series. But I've really learned a lot from those gals. It's just thewritinggals.com. And I have this. This is, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, Victorine's trope list.
There you
And
go.
it's up on their website, thewritinggals.com.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a ton of tropes, and she has it just up there, and I printed it out. It's 10 pages of different tropes.
Wow. Yeah, she's got 40 some for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least. So
yeah.
She has those. So if you guys are interested in finding the other tropes, they're up there on the Writing Gals website with a little like 2 or 3 sentence explanation about what each one is. And she even has like, this one would go well with this one, that kind of thing too up there. So if you're interested, just check it out. I thought it was really, really helpful, because when I just started writing romance, I've never written romance before. Just in the last year, I started doing a sweet romance series, and I had no clue what I was doing. And I learned so much from Victorine and her writing gal partners.
She's very good.
It was just really helpful. Mm-hmm.
I saw that in her book. She talked about the other 2 ladies that she was in this group with, that they do podcasts, I guess.
Yeah, they do YouTube. Every other Thursday they have a YouTube video. And then they have a Facebook that people are asking questions in all the time. And I was in their conference. They just had an online conference. So.
Oh, good for you. You probably know way more than I do about what's a good idea today.
I'm sure not. I just started, so.
Thanks for mentioning that resource, and make sure that Victor gets that too, because that would be excellent to include. Yeah.
There was another question, just as Jennifer.
Yeah, Gretchen?
Yeah, I'm currently writing a romance novella where one of the protagonists is from France. It takes place in modern times. But I mean, how is the best way to research sexual norms and practices in different cultures?
Yeah, you got me. I'm
okay.
I think you know.
Why I asked.
You know.
I don't want to just make assumptions.
Yeah, and the only way that I can think to do that is, of course, do you speak French?
Oui. Yes.
Good. Read some of what's acceptable over there. Read what they're saying about it over there and find out, because you should be able to find some cultural information if you are familiar with the language. That might be a possibility. I
didn't want just to Google, sexual norms and practices in France,
Yeah. Yeah, whatever way you can find it. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just have to meet a Frenchman.
Yeah, take a trip, I mean, wait till COVID's over with. Take a trip.
Thank you, Donna.
Donna, I wanted to ask you about, am I coming through?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
I wanted to ask, since I'm going to talk about researching your history or historical fiction book next, and you said you consider yourself more a historical fiction than a historical romance person, actually. So I just was wondering, what do you think is the attraction of combining history with romance?
It boils down to what is the attraction of history and romance? You know what it boils
like as
down
opposed to romance and contemporary.
Okay, wait, say that again, because I was kind of not hearing you.
Well, like for example, why would an author choose to write a historical romance over a contemporary romance, or why do you think readers like historical romances, as opposed to contemporary romances?
Yeah, Tyler, I got a one-word answer.
Okay.
Market. Where's the market? Okay, because here's what happened to me. This goes back to the 1980s. When I started to write contemporary
I'm so sorry.
romances in the 1980s. Then by the time I was able to get published, the whole market had switched to historical romances. The popularity of contemporary had died out. The popularity of historical had risen up. And Zondervan was looking for proposals for historical romances. So reluctantly, I made that switch, which it set me on a different course for the remaining career. But that is why I did it. And it isn't whether the setting is contemporary or historical. For a romance reader, that isn't it. It's all about the push-pull and the touchy-feely and the emotional content of the story. It's always the emotional content of the story, which is why I had so much trouble continuing to be a romance writer, because I got so wrapped up in the history that really what I cared about was what the history was. And that really eased me out of a strictly historical romance scenario into historical fiction with what they call, or would define it as, historical fiction with a strong romantic thread. That's what I write. I have been writing for a long time.
Okay. I'm thinking that historical fiction, history itself presents more obstacles for the lovers. I mean, today, you know, you have free love, we'll call it that. You know, whereas in the Victorian period, you'd go and you'd date this person with their mother in the room, and you'd have, you know, you would just have more obstacles. So is that, you think part of it is the plotting of the novel?
You know, you see, you've just come up with the classic contradiction. Is so the harder it is for a romantic couple to have a romantic story, the more obstacles in the way, then the more tension you can build in the story, and the more the readers want to keep turning the pages. So to me, history is great. You just, for every reason you just named, you know, it's great, because what can they do? They either have to be very, very subtle in how they are behaving romantically. That's why we have the language of flowers, okay? You know, because you just couldn't be that out front with your feelings back in the Victorian era. So what did you do? You consulted your flower book to find out what flower sent the message you wanted to send, and then you sent your girl some flowers. I just think it's the great way to build tension. Just put those obstacles in the way, and they have to figure out a way to overcome it. And it's all about what it's all the inner dialogue, you know, it's what they're thinking and what they're feeling, but not necessarily what they're saying to the other person, and not necessarily what that other person is grasping. And I mean, that's how the Victorians did it. But as we know, the Victorians were very, very successful in the bedroom. Look at the Queen. She had 11 kids.
And thanks, Donna.
Yeah.
Well, I think speaking as a reader of both genres, I appreciate when the genres are melded together.
So you mean like historical fiction plus the romance part of it?
With romance, or romance set in a historical era. I feel like the book is much more complex.
Yes, I tend to agree, but I guess maybe because I'm an old soul, and I don't, you know, I'm not really grasping what is so great about having a partner that you are living with and you're not married to, and you know, there's no I want to say no, there's certainly no legal security and maybe no emotional, or I don't know. I just have trouble relating to that because of the era that I am. And I like historical because I can relate to it better, maybe.
I agree that blending genres definitely helps. And I'm thinking of, lately I've been reading the Outlander books, which I don't know if the rest of you are familiar with them, but Diana Gabaldon.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they've been made into a TV series on Netflix, and she was actually named, like, her novel Outlander was named America's second favorite book after Catcher in the Rye by PBS last year. So, but what she does is she blends romance with history and time travel. So her main character is living in the 1940s, time travels back to the 1740s in Scotland, falls in love, and then she has the question, do I come back? And then, of course, there's all the question of, am I going to change time? She's involved with the Battle of Culloden in Scotland. So I think that, you know, that's been very successful as a result.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, but you know, let's say the more dilemmas you can place into the plot, the better off your story will be. So that's a good example of how to do it.
Right, and that one combines those tropes, but then also it has additional opportunities for those tensions and those obstacles for the romance because of what's happening in each of the time periods and needing to go back and forth and other kinds of pressures.
Yeah, that's good. Because then you're drawing upon the actual settings as being another hurdle in the story. So it helps, I think. Yeah.
Donna, if I could ask one more question. I'm wondering if, is online dating a part of plots? Is that a common part of the plots in more contemporary romances?
Wow, good question. I mean, I haven't read any because I haven't been reading contemporary romances really. And so I am not one who can answer that. But Jen, have you read any that have online dating is?
Yeah, they do. It's sometimes it is. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
The one I just read by one of the writing gals was actually, this was kind of a funny, it was a second chance trope. It was about a divorced couple actually. And they were both starting to date again, and they were both on, I can't remember, I've read so many romance books trying to figure out the whole tropes and everything, but so I can't remember exactly, but the plot was that the woman was ready to date again, so she went on this dating app, and the man, he and his son were hanging out with his friend who's on this, and the son went, "Mommy," and clicked. And so like the friend had like right swiped his friend's ex, and so the friend wanted to, or the husband, the ex-husband really was still in love with her and wanted to win her back. And so he took his friend's dating app information, and like they were going back and forth, and like, I don't know, it was this big long.
That's funny.
But
So
yeah,
sometimes
they do use dating apps.
So is that a combination of then of a second chance and then also in a way kind of a pretend relationship? Because am I right?
Yeah.
He thought she was having a relationship with a friend and not actually her ex. Was that right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, like it's identity.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find it. Mistaken identity or something. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good combination for you. Yeah.
It's almost like a blind date that keeps on going.
Yeah.
Usually a blind date, you know, as soon as you meet, you're no longer blind. But when you are on the internet, you can string it out in the winter. I don't know if it's ever a book, but You Got Mail.
Yeah.
Where you got two people talking back and forth on the internet as kind of a blind date. And that went on forever until they found out who they were.
Yeah.
And then that combined that trope of whatever you call it, like they don't get along, right?
Uh-huh.
They were enemies.
Enemies.
Yeah.
Enemies, yeah.
Somewhere, I can't remember now. It must be one of those. It's got to have been some old thing I was watching, or anyway. It went like this. You know, you got the one person who's saying, "Hey, you know, I got the perfect date for you, and it's going to be so and so, and this and that," and all the description is great, and then it turns out to be the woman he dumped her. They dumped each other a long time back, you know. So it turns out they cannot believe, you know. So they're enemies, but now they're being put into a second chance situation. And anyhow, I wish I could remember where I saw that. It's come across my path a couple times recently, but it's really, really funny.
Anna, I am Nini. I have a question.
Yeah.
I am curious in your presentation saying about romance or novels in the Amish people. You were saying that it is not written for the Amish.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Could you elaborate for that? So people who write about or on Amish novels, they are not Amish people. Is that what you're saying?
That absolutely correct. Yes, the Amish are not writing them, and the Amish are not reading them for the most part. So yeah, so if you did want to write something in the Amish, which to me, I'm still amazed that neither. Well, I'm amazed that Amazon just doesn't have it as a subgenre, Amish romance, because you know it really blossomed a few years back. And there are certain writers who were just renowned for doing it well, and they're all and none of them are not Amish. They're all just studying or researching various communities. Some in Indiana, some in maybe Pennsylvania or Ohio. So yeah, it's not what you think on its face. You see Amish romance and you think, oh,
I see.
yeah. It's
no. They are written by observers, actually.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll take a look at this because in Houghton, I think there is a bookstore, and when I went there, they have like a book rack special for the Amish novels there. You know, because I could see like the pictures on the cover with the head covering of the Amish people, like that. So this is very interesting from your presentation that they are not written by the Amish, but by outside observers.
Right, and to be even a little bit more specific, well, I did say it's evangelical women over the age of 40. And that's true. But here's another part of it. The Amish novels that are written as Amish romance novels, and they are let's say some of the concepts that the writer will put into the book are very, very suspect as far as being Amish concepts. They just aren't, and the reason is because evangelical readers wouldn't like them. So what the writers of Amish romance have done is they have conflated the two. They have conflated evangelical ideas with Amish tradition. That is what they are doing. I certainly would not read an Amish romance today and expect to learn what the truth is. You won't learn the truth about the Amish that way. You need to go to some nonfiction and find the truth.
Right.
So what they've done is they have made the story palatable to the evangelical reader, and it doesn't necessarily line up with what the Amish really do.
So this answers wondered some time ago when I saw a movie about Amish, I think Harrison or something, the actor. And then sometime after I read the review, that it's like there is a review saying that, well, this does not really portray the Amish society, except just from the outwardly clothing that the actors in the movie were wearing. So now, from your presentation, I understood about that review of that movie. When it says that, oh, that movie is not really Amish or what the Amish do. Because even if that movie was based on a novel about Amish people, then it was not written by the Amish person or Amish novelist.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Furthermore, there's not one set of rules for the Amish. Every church makes its own rules. And there are some very, very conservative, what they call old order Amish churches, which are very, very, very strict. And I mean, you can be shunned for the slightest little infraction. And then there are some less strict Amish whose churches have more relaxed rules about what is acceptable. And what Amish is about is it's about Amish tradition. Whatever the tradition is in the local church is what it's about. It isn't about maybe yours or my interpretation of the Old and New Testament and Christianity. It's not about that. You know?
I understand.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. You mentioned that we might want to consider using a pen name when we are publishing our romance work. Being a children's book author, that's something I would consider. What's involved with taking on a pen name? Is there anything legally that you need to do, or do you have a double identity with the publisher? How does it work?
I've never used a pen name, so I'm not a good one to ask about pen names, but I do know that you want to be very careful when it comes to what the copyright name is in, because it's going to have to be in your real name, unless there's some extenuating circumstance under which you can and will be allowed to copyright it under a pen name. So you know those things you want to be careful about. But it really shouldn't be an issue, because on your, the verso of your title page where you list the copyright, who's the copyright owner, and it normally will say your legal name. But if the name on the cover is your pen name, it doesn't really matter, because what the important thing is that you wanted to separate the genre of children's literature that you wrote under maybe your own real name. You want to separate that from what you're going to write for romance readers under perhaps a pen name. Okay, so I just would be careful.
Thanks.
All right, I think that wraps it up for today. Donna, thanks for being on with us. This was a real education, and thanks everyone else for all your questions and comments.